publishers.
Hello learners, welcome to Manifested Online Classes. My name is Moniki. Before we start our today's lesson, I want us to review the previous lesson where I defined Boyle's law and did a simple illustration of Boyle's law. I said that Boyle's law states that the volume of a given mass of a gas is inversely proportional to its pressure at constant temperature. The volume of a given mass of a gas is inversely proportional to pressure at constant temperature. That is what we said. The example we gave was using a piston or using this illustration. So I said that this is just a tube, and this is the piston. And remember in Form 1, we said there are three states of matter, which is a solid, liquid, and a gas. And again, we said that matter is anything which has mass and occupies space. So this space has matter, and we have the particles of air inside. So demonstrating Boyle's law using this simple demonstration, then I said that if you press the piston, the volume will decrease. The volume decreases. And at the same time, the pressure increases because the particles, they're now closer to one another, and hence they collide more effectively or more effectively within themselves and with the walls of the container. And that collision is what is creating pressure. That is a simple demonstration I give you in the previous lesson. And I say that you can present this Boyle's law in a curve or using a curve or a curve to demonstrate Boyle's law. I drew a curve like this. I told you that this is a graph of pressure against volume. So graph of pressure against volume said that anytime they are inversely proportional, that when pressure increases, volume decreases, and when volume decreases, pressure increases. Therefore, the curve was like this. And one thing I want you to note is that the curve does not touch both the x and the y axis. And the reason is that the volume cannot be zero and the pressure cannot be zero again. And that's why the axis or this curve is not touching the y-axis and the x-axis, because the volume cannot be zero and the pressure again cannot be zero. If you have a volume, then there is pressure involved in that volume. So basically that is what we discussed in the previous lesson. In this lesson, I want to show you the mathematical expression of Boyle's law. The mathematical expression of Boyle's law. In Boyle's law, we said that volume is inversely proportional to pressure. So this is when volume increases, pressure decreases. And when pressure increases, volume decreases. Therefore, volume, see, is inversely proportional to pressure. This is a symbol of proportionality, that volume is inversely proportional to pressure. This is just 1 over pressure, which can also be written as V, standing for volume is inversely proportional to pressure. So V inversely proportional to pressure. And this one can also be written as V is equals to a constant 1 over P. V is equals to a constant over 1 K 1 over P. This one can now be expressed as Vp is equals to a constant. So if you multiply V and P, then you'll get this constant. So Vp is equals to constant K. Therefore, if you have a certain amount of a gas, a certain volume of a gas, if this volume of a gas is having some pressure because these particles of a gas are in continuous state of motion, so they are colliding with one another and also with the walls of the container or the vessel where this gas is. Remember again, you have seen that the volume cannot be 0 and the pressure again cannot be 0 in this graphical representation. Therefore, if you have a certain volume of a gas, this volume of a gas is having a pressure. So if that volume changes, let's say you have volume, you have V, volume 1 of a certain gas, and pressure 1. If the volume changes to pressure, if the volume changes to V2, if volume changes to V2, the pressure also changes to P2, because anytime you interfere with the volume, pressure is also interfered with. If you raise the volume, pressure decreases. I hope you get that. If you lower the volume, pressure rises or increases. Get that very clearly. So this means that, or this one can be expressed as V1 P1 is equals to P2, it's equals to V2 P2, which is equals to K which is a constant. Therefore, V1 P1 is equals to V2 P2. And that is the expression we use in Boyle's law. And this expression just means that V1, or where V1 is equals to the initial volume V1 is the initial volume just before the change. V2 is the final volume P1, the initial volume, P2 is the final pressure. So this is supposed to be initial pressure. Initial pressure. So V1 is the initial volume before you did a change. V2 is now that final volume. P1 is the initial pressure, and P2 is the final pressure after the change. Therefore, this is the expression we'll be using in all our calculations. In all our calculations, we'll use V1 P1, which is equals to V2 P2, where V1 is the initial volume, V2 is the final volume, P1 is the initial pressure, and P2 is the final pressure. So that is the expression. So basically that is how you are coming up with this expression, and that is our lesson. But just before the end of the lesson, I would like to remind you or do a small recap on what we have learned. We have learned that Boyle's law states that the volume of a given mass of a gas is inversely proportional to pressure at constant temperature. And today we are doing the mathematical expression of Boyle's law. So you have seen that volume is inversely proportional to pressure. So this volume V is inversely, I've seen this as a symbol of proportionality, inversely proportional to pressure, which can also be written as V is equals to a constant 1 over P. So if you multiply this P and V, you now get Vp, which is equals to this constant. And that's why you're getting this expression. And again, I've said that if you have a certain mass of a gas, with a certain volume, because a certain mass of a gas will have a certain volume. If you change the volume of that gas, you either raise it or you lower it, the pressure will also change. And that's why I've said that if you have volume V1 at pressure P1, if the volume changes to V2, the pressure also changes to P2, because anytime you raise or lower the volume, the pressure will also rise or go down at the same time. And that is now where we have come up with this expression that V1 P1 is equals to V2 P2, which is equals to a constant. And therefore, we have said that V1 P1 is equals to V2 P2, where V1 is the initial volume, V2 is the final volume, P1 is the initial pressure, and P2 is the final pressure. Get that very clearly. That is the end of our lesson. But before I end, I will give you these assignments. Assignment. Assignment is derive a Boyle's law formula. Derive a Boyle's law formula. We have looked at how you're able to derive the Boyle's law formula. I believe you'll be able to derive the Boyle's law. That brings us to the end of our lesson. Thank you for being attentive. Bye. Meet in the next lesson.
Welcome to Manifested Publishers.
Welcome to History and Government lesson. Today we are going to study on a topic entitled Establishment of Colonial Rule in Kenya. Establishment of Colonial Rule in Kenya. That is the topic that we are continuing to study. And remember, we started by looking back and seeing how the British, or the process of the partitioning of East Africa, and finally how the British started to occupy the African or the Kenyan territory. We also learned that they used company rule to establish their rule, which company was used by the British to establish their authority and control in Kenya. I hope you are able to remember. We said it is the Imperial British East African Company. And we studied how it established the control, how it started getting areas and investing in the Kenyan territory. But at some point, it was overwhelmed. The duty became too much because the land was quite big and they did not have enough resources. So the government of Britain, or the British government, decided to send in more officials to act directly on behalf of the British government. And that is how they ended up establishing and occupying the Kenyan territory. So in the last lesson, we learned how the Kenyans reacted, how the Kenyan societies reacted to the occupation of the British, the response of the Kenyan communities to British occupation. And we said the societies reacted in 3 ways. Can you be able to remember the 3 ways in which the Kenyan societies were able to react against the colonial or the British people? The 3 ways. We said there are 3 of them. 3 ways. Which are they? The first one, we said it is resistance. Resistance. They resisted. They stood and fought against the British. And we mentioned several communities. We also mentioned that they reacted by collaborating, that is, cooperating with the British people. And then we said there are other communities that had mixed reactions. Mixed reactions means some were resisting while others were cooperating at the same time. And in our last lesson, we started engaging into the resistance as a response. So number 1, we are studying resistance to British rule. That is the subtopic that we are having. And the community that we are studying is the resistance of the Nandi. So number 1, the first community is the Nandi. We said there are other communities apart from Nandi that resisted. Are you able to remember them? The communities that resisted the British colonial rule. The first one that we are studying are the Nandi. We also mentioned there are the Bukusu. We also shall see the Agiriama, and then finally we shall look at the Somali. So, but we have started with the Nandi, and we said in our last lesson we studied the causes. What were the things that forced the Nandi to resist against the British rule? We said there are several reasons. The major one being the pride of the Nandi. They thought they are superior. They had conquered most of their neighbors, so they had a sense of pride. They were naturally people who were warlike, so they were able to defeat most of the neighbors. Also, they had a very strong leadership that galvanized the people and encouraged them to fight against the British. Then the other reason is that they did not like the color. The color of the British made them to fight against them. They were considered to be like devils. Also, Kim Nyole's prophecy played another role, or was another cause of the people of the Nandi fighting against the British. He also mentioned that the land alienation, or the loss of land, was a cause for them to fight. Also, they had military. They had military training. Most of their army was military, was well trained and disciplined, which encouraged them to fight against the British, among many other causes that we mentioned. So in our today's lesson, we are going now to look further and make another step forward and ask ourselves, how did the war progress? How did they resist against the British? How did the war begin, and how were they defeated, if at all they were defeated? So we're going to look at the cause of the Nandi resistance. The cause of the Nandi resistance. The cause of the Nandi resistance. And the first thing we are supposed we learn is that it started in 1895. That is when the resistance started, and it started after certain British known as Andrew Dick attacked and killed two Nandi warriors. Who had strayed into his camp. This was a British trader. So in his camp, he met some two Nandi warriors who are working in his camp, and decided to kill them. So decided to kill. Actually, this is to kill. Decided to kill two Nandi warriors. So when he attacked and killed these warriors, this angered the whole community. The whole community now, or the other people, decided to retaliate against the British, and they in turn killed the Nandi. The Nandi killed another British trader who was known as Peter West. Peter West. So immediately after Andrew Dick attacked and killed the two Nandi warriors, the community resulted or retaliated by killing another trader who was known as Peter West. So that sparked the bad blood, or sparked the killings, or the resistance of the Nandi. Immediately after that, the Nandi also continued with a series of attacks on the British traders. So there was a series of attacks. They constantly attacked the British traders who are coming from the coast as they go towards Uganda, that was engaging in the trade. So every now and then the Nandi could stage or mount attacks against these traders, and it happened that each and every time they attacked, the British could send expeditions, that is an army or a people, to try and quench or fight against the people. So this happened by them. So the British, we are saying, decided, British sends expeditions, and these are organized armies to go and try and fight against the Nandi, who every now and then are attacking the traders on their trading activities. But something to the detriment of the British, every time they send an expedition, it was unable to conquer the Nandi, because the Nandi were well trained. Remember, I said they had a very strong army based on the initiation. Each and every time the young men were initiated, they were called into the army, to serve into the army, and they became very disciplined. So they, every time the British was able to send an expedition after an attack, it was always defeated. So these continued that in 1897, that is 2 years later, in 1897, that is 2 years later, the Nandi made a very severe attack on the British Mail Party. British Mail Party. This was a group of traders that were going on with their trading activities, but the Nandi decided to fight, or decided to attack them, and these really angered the British. So they decided to bring a very or even more punitive expeditions to fight against the Nandi. But in the same way, the first one had started or had been unable to be quenched. The British were defeated. Why? Because immediately the British were bringing their armies or their soldiers to fight against the Nandi. The Nandi could just attack them and then go and hide in the terrain, hide in the forest. And remember, this is their homeland. They understand their terrain better than the British. So they could easily attack and then go and hide against the British. So the British could not make significant impact. They could not attack or be able to defeat the Nandi warriors, and because they could easily sleep. They have just attacked them, and when they ran away, you could not know where the British could not know what had happened. This happened even continued even in 1899 when there was building. This happened. There was when the building of the railway reached the Nandi territory. The attacks by the Nandi intensified at this period. Remember, in the Kim Nyole's prophecy, as I had mentioned earlier, he had seen the prophet had seen an iron snake. He had seen a very big snake coming into the land of the Nandi. So when the Nandi saw the railway entering their territory, they saw what had been prophesied earlier by Kim Nyole, and these made them even more furious, because they had discredited Kim Nyole as being a witch, or being his prophecy not being true. But now they saw it coming. They saw the rail entering their land. So they intensified their fight. They now could fight even more, because they did not want that rail to pass through their territory. Remember, we said the Nandi they were very proud. They had prestige. They believed they are the best, and they had the right to own that land, and nobody else could be able to do anything on that land without their consent. So they intensified their fights during this year. And so the British tried to get the Indians and the Swahilis and the Maasai together with some of the Buganda auxiliaries. Those are people that were hired to come and fight on behalf of the British. So the British tried to organize a very large expeditions, especially during this time when they are building the railway. Remember, the railway is the center stone. It could have eased the movement of raw materials. So they really needed this railway to go to those interior parts. So they tried to bring other people, and I have mentioned they tried to bring the the Swahili soldiers, and also hired the the Baganda together with the Maasai auxiliaries. These are hired hands to come and fight. But even so, they still were unable. They were still unable to get, or they were still unable to continue or to be able to fight effectively or stop the Nandi from attacking them. So they became frustrated. But the British government at that time sent a colonel or an army commander who is known as Colonel Menzies. Colonel quite a name here. Colonel Menzies again, right? This was a colonel that was sent, or that was leading the expeditions that was sent. Actually, this was in 1900. So when this man came, he discovered that the reason why the Nandi are fighting so furiously, and they have been, every expedition that they have tried to bring against the Nandi was being quenched or was being defeated. He discovered that the strength, or the strength of the Nandi was based on the Orkoiyot, who was the religious leader, who was the overall leader of the Nandi. So he was the chief strategist of the Nandi community. He was the source of the strength of the Nandi. So when he discovered the Orkoiyot at that time, who was known as Koitalel Arap Samoei, right? And Arap means the son of, right? So the Orkoiyot at that time, Koitalel Arap Samoei, this is an I, Samoei. So this man discovered that Koitalel Arap Samoei, who was the leader of the Nandi people at that time, was the reason why the Nandi were so united, was the reason why the Nandi could not be defeated, because he was the chief strategist. Remember, he was the religious leaders. So he made or brought all the people of the Nandi together. So what this man did, he decided to trick the Koitalel Arap Samoei with the other leaders into a meeting in the pretense of trying to discuss out or getting a way out. But what he had in intention was to execute, and actually he executed Koitalel Arap Samoei along with some other leaders. So these demoralized the warriors who are fighting, because now the leader, or the strength, the centerpiece, the cornerstone of their resistance has been captured and executed. And that was the strategy of this colonel. So he discovered that the community was galvanized or was united by the institution of the Orkoiyot, and the leader then who was taking the Orkoiyot at that time was Koitalel Arap Samoei. So he tricked him together with some leaders into a peace meeting, and then he captured Koitalel Arap Samoei and executed him. So that really demoralized the warriors. They could not now have a united attack against the British. They had now been disheartened. Their hearts were broken because their leader, the one who was leading them, the one who was giving them the courage to go and fight, had now been executed. So the British took that opportunity, and in 1905, immediately after the execution of the Koitalel Arap Samoei, the Orkoiyot at that time, though they continued to fight, but they did not fight with the vigor that had. So in 1905, the British sent the biggest expedition ever they had ever amassed. They were able to get 1,500. They were able to get 1,500 Indian and Swahili soldiers to come and fight against the Nandi. Also, they also included some Somali soldiers, right? And then, apart from the 1,500 soldiers that were sent at that time, they also hired 1,300 auxiliaries to come and also join in the expeditions. Apart from that, they also armed. They had 900 armed porters. These were the people who were carrying the trading items from the interior into the coast, the porters. So they armed them, and also they had 10 machine guns. 10 machine guns and 2 armored trains. So this was the biggest expedition that the British had amassed against any community, because now the Nandi had become too much. So the British decided to get the largest army, the largest expedition that they could get. So you can imagine, all these people are directed against one community, against the Nandi, who have been fighting for them actually for a very long time. So though the Nandi at this time, they are demoralized. Remember that they are now demoralized because their leader has been executed, and now the leaders are unable to continue. The ones who are available at that time could not effectively take the opposition of the Orkoiyot. So the Nandi, though they tried to fight bravely, they were defeated in this year, and they were finally taken over. Their land was finally taken over by the British. So the Nandi is one community in Kenya that gave out a very long resistance. They resisted the British for quite a long time. They put up a fight that the British did not expect. It was you can see it started in 1895 and actually ended in 1905. That is 10 years of continued fighting. That was very expensive for the British, but for them, they were in their land because they had understood their land. So you ask yourself, what enabled the British or the Nandi to give such a long resistance? So reasons for the long resistance. Number one, they understood their terrain. So that is one reason why they put on a very long resistance. Reasons for long resistance. So number one, I've said the terrain worked to their advantage. The terrain. So the mountainous terrain, this is a highland, this is the Rift Valley. They have hills, they have valleys. So they understood their terrain very well, as opposed to the British, who were visitors in that area, and even the Swahili and the Swahili and the Somali and the Indians who were coming to help the British could not be able to understand that terrain. So that gave them an advantage. Another reason why they put on a long resistance was their army. They had a very large army that was provided by the AZ system. Every time they had initiation, they recruited new army members, and the army was very disciplined, just like that of the British. They were very disciplined and well trained because they took a lot of time, and also they had a constant supply of food. They had constant supply of food. They had mixed economy. They were farmers and livestock keepers. Though with the British coming to attack them, at some point they used the scorched earth policy, where they could burn down and destroy the Nandi food. They had surplus food because they were livestock keepers. So that enabled them to continue fighting. And also they had experience, they had military experience. They had military experience that enabled them to continue fighting. They had fought a lot of battles. They had subdued all their neighbors, including the Maasai that came to help the British. So they had amassed a lot of experience in their fighting. The next thing was that they had pride. They did not believe that they could be defeated, and it was their culture to continue to get wins in every battle. So they were a very proud people. They were a people who were susceptible to war. They could not accept any kind of defeat. And then the second last, they had able leadership. Able leadership. Koitalel Arap Samoei, who was the Orkoiyot at that time, provided a very solid leadership. He galvanized the whole community. The warriors, together with the communities, came together to fight against the British. And then lastly, the climate was to their advantage. The cold climate, the British could not withstand the climate in the Rift Valley. So that gave the Nandi a comparative advantage over the British. So today we have learned about the cause of the resistance of the Nandi, and how we have interrogated into details how they fought against the British and how finally they were defeated in 1905. And I've also explained the different reasons why the Nandi were able to give such a prolonged period of fighting. They fought for a very long time. So that brings us now to the end of our lesson. But before we end, allow me to give you this revision question. Allow me to give you this revision question. You just write it here. Revision question. And the question is, state and explain the reasons why the Nandi put up a prolonged resistance. State and explain the reasons why the Nandi put up a prolonged resistance. State and explain the reasons why the Nandi put up a prolonged resistance. So those that is the question I want you to attempt at your free time. I encourage you not to check on what you have or on your notes that you have made. Just try and remember what we have learned. And with that, we've come to the end of our lesson today. Until the next time we shall meet, it's bye-bye.
Welcome to Manifested Publishers.
Welcome learners, my name is Stephen Kariungi, and today we continue with our topic of discussion, and this is genetics. Today I would like us to discuss the causes of variation. During the last lesson, we discussed the two types of variations, that is continuous and discontinuous variations, and we gave examples. And from that, we want to find out what are the causes of those variations. Now, the first thing to note about variations is that variations can either be caused by genetic factors or environmental factors. The genetic factors are factors within us. Within us, for example, our gametes and so on and so forth, how fertilization occurs. But also these variations can also be brought about by occurrences that are taking place in the environment that is outside our bodies. And we shall mention something that is called mutation. So basically we can say that variations are caused by both genetic and environmental factors. And these factors include, or the causes of variations include, one, the process of gamete formation. The process of gamete formation. When gametes are being formed, there is likelihood of variations occurring there. And this is why we earlier mentioned that even if two brothers are from the same parents, they do not look exactly the same. They do not look identical, because the process of gamete formation is different between the two. As we shall see. Now, in the process of gamete formation, I would like us to mention two processes. One that is called crossing over. That's one of the processes during gamete formation that brings about variation. And this crossing over, this is the exchange of genetic material between chromosomes, which takes place at prophase 1. Prophase 1 is the prophase of meiosis 1. We discussed the cell division at form 3 level. So we know the happenings that occur during this stage that we are referring to as prophase 1, whereby we say that the homologous chromosomes, they come together, they intertwine, and then an exchange of genetic material can occur there. So we are going to have an illustration of that. For example, I have a chromosome here. Of course, you know that the chromosomes are made of two parallel strands that we call chromatids. And those chromatids are joined together at the centromere, that is the center. And then I have another chromosome as well. Let's say we shade one so that we can be able to distinguish them. Although when we are drawing diagrams in biology, we are not supposed to shade, but I'm just using this to show the distinction that this chromosome is different from the other chromosome. So these chromosomes, when they come together and intertwine, we refer to this as synapses. Synapses, which is the intertwining of chromosomes. They intertwine at the point of intertwining at the chiasmata. This point is what we are referring to as chiasma. This is another chiasma. So when there are two, they are called chiasmata. Chiasma is the singular. They intertwine. First of all, they move close to each other, then they intertwine at the chiasma. And whatever is formed, forming bivalence. So for example, the whole of this structure is a bivalent. So forming bivalence. So after intertwining, an exchange of genetic material will take place. An exchange of genetic material will take place such that when they break apart, when they reach the point whereby they'll separate, so we can now remove the chiasma. They have broken apart. So there is this section that was in this chromosome that has been transferred to this other chromosome. And there is this section that was in this chromosome that has been transferred to the other chromosome. So that is the point that leads to the exchange of the genetic material. So the genes that were in that particular section have been exchanged. They have been transferred from this chromosome to this, and some have been transferred from this chromosome to the other. So we are calling that crossing over. And it's one of the causes of variation during gamete formation. So we are saying that it is the exchange of genetic material between chromosomes which take place at prophase 1. So this process occurs at prophase 1. Another area where the another stage in gamete formation where the variations can occur is what we call the independent assortment, which occurs during metaphase 1. Now, independent assortment simply means the random assortment. This is whereby the next stage after this, after prophase 1, the chromosomes will move on to metaphase 1, whereby they will be aligned at the equator of the spindle fibers. So the alignment of the chromosomes, while still as bivalents, at the equator of the spindle is random. So they can be aligned in a particular manner, or they can be aligned in a different manner. So there are various ways in which those chromosomes can be randomly aligned at the equator of the spindle. So we are saying that the alignment of chromosomes, that is homologous chromosomes, while still as bivalents, is random. And that is what we are calling independent assortment. We'll illustrate that. So it's random, and then after that random assortment, after they start now separating, they can separate in different manners. So for example, that one can go to that daughter cell, this one can go to that particular daughter cell, this one can go to this daughter cell, this one can go to that daughter cell. So there are different ways in which they can lead to different daughter cells where they'll become gametes. Of course, transferring some variations to that gamete and on the other side transferring some gametes. So we'll have an illustration. For example, we have this is a chromosome, and assuming its pair is this, a smaller one, so that is one way in which the chromosomes can be assorted. So this one can go to one daughter cell, and this pair can also go to the other daughter cell. So this is one way in which random assortment can happen. On the other hand, you may have this and this going together. And these ones go to a particular daughter cell, while the ones I'm using are smaller size. And these ones can go to a particular daughter cell. So this shows the first situation and the second situation. So this shows a random assortment of homologous chromosomes. So there are so many ways in which the chromosomes can be assorted in different ways, leading to very many variations. So this one can go to one daughter cell, this one goes to another daughter cell, carrying its own genes there. On the other hand, still within the same process of gamete formation, these ones can go together and these ones can go together, carrying different genes into a certain daughter cell. So that random assortment, or that independent assortment that occurs during metaphase 1 is what we are saying that is another cause of variation during the process of gamete formation. So gamete formation is one process that leads to variations, either during crossing over or during independent assortment. But just to elaborate that point on independent assortment, for example, in humans, we have 23 pairs of chromosomes. That means 46 chromosomes in every somatic cell. So in this case, what can happen, if we have 23 pairs of chromosomes, then it means the number of independent assortments possible is 2, because we have paired chromosomes, raised to power 23. Those are the number of times we can have different assortments in our chromosomes during metaphase 1, because we are saying that in humans we have 23 pairs. So 23 becomes the power. The 2 for the pair can have 23 to the power of 23, as in the number of times it can be assorted. So if you calculate this value, you will get something that is above 8 millions number of ways in which this can happen. In fact, if you are to get a calculator and say 2 raised to power 23, then it's going to give you a figure that is above 8 million, the number of times we can have different assortments out of the 23 pairs that we have. So that is one likelihood of variations. Number two, variations occur during fertilization, also occur during fertilization, and this is whereby the male gamete nucleus fuses with the female gamete nucleus to form a zygote. So in other words, we are saying that the zygote will carry the genes that were on the male gamete nucleus and those that are in the female gamete nucleus in different combinations. So basically we are saying that the gamete that fertilized the first time may not be identical to the one that will fertilize the second time. So, and this is why we are saying that even the siblings who are of the same parents, they do not show complete identity, or they are not completely identical because of fertilization. Also, there is another cause of variation, and this one is basically environmental, and this is now during mutations. And you can see that mutations, these ones are spontaneous, or you can say that they are inheritable. They are inheritable changes in genetic constitution of an organism. The inheritable changes in genetic constitution of an organism, and these mutations are caused by mutagens. Mutagens are the ones that cause mutations, and we have examples of mutagens, e.g. We have things like radiations, such as the UV, ultraviolet rays. They have been associated to be some of the radiations that that cause the genetic constitution of an organism to change. And when the genetic constitution changes, then it is transferred to the offspring, especially those mutations that affect the gametes. You can say that mutations that affect gametes are inheritable. They are inheritable because gametes can be transmitted from parents to the offspring. So the most significant mutations are those that happen in the gametes because they are passed on. So if there are changes that happen, then that is likely. So we are saying that mutagens include radiations, even gamma radiations, gamma rays. We even have chemicals, chemical mutagens, all these that cause mutations. E.g., we have what we call the mustard gas. So all these colchicine. So those are some of the chemicals that may cause the inheritable changes in genetic constitution, what we are calling mutations to happen. So we are going to stop there and have an assignment. So the assignment, explain how the following processes lead to variations. A, crossing over. B, independent assortment of chromosomes, and C, mutations. So we are going to stop there. Until next time, goodbye.
Welcome to Manifested Publishers.
Hello and welcome to our today's lesson, History and Government. We are learning about the establishment of colonial rule in Kenya. That is the topic that we are learning, and we are been learning about the Kenyan society's response to the process of colonization by the British. And just as a matter of remembrance and overview of what we have already covered, is that we mentioned that the European or the Kenyan communities reacted in different ways towards the invasion by the British in their territories. What are these ways? Which are these responses that the Kenyan communities instituted against or towards the British? Are you able to remember them? We said there are three ways in which, or there are three responses that the Kenyan communities responded to the process of European colonization in Kenya. What are these three ways? We said number one, they resisted. There was resistance. They came up in arms against the British occupying their land. Some of the communities that resisted include what? The one that we are studying, that is the Nandi. Which are the other communities that resisted? We mentioned that in our introductory lesson. We said the other one is the Agriama. We also mentioned the Bukusu and the Somali. Apart from resistance, which was the other method? We said number one, we have resistance. Number two, which is the other response that the Kenyans gave towards the British. The other one was collaboration. Very good. They collaborated or cooperated or accepted the rule in exchange of protection and other things. And there are two communities that collaborated with the British in Kenya. That is the Maasai and the Wanga. That is in among the Western Bantus. Also, there was a third response which we classified or which we called the mixed reaction or mixed response. That is, portion of the community was collaborating with the British while the other was resisting, or initially they collaborated and later on decided to resist. An example are the Agikuyu. So those are the responses, and that is what we are tackling. But now in our today's lesson, and under the Nandi resistance, in our previous lesson we looked at the factors or the reasons why the Nandi resisted the British rule, and we mentioned and discussed them in detail. And then in our last lesson we also discussed the cause, how they fought, what initiated the war, how they fought against the British, and the expeditions that were sent by the British against the Nandi. And we also outlined and discussed the reasons the factors that made the Nandi to put up a prolonged resistance. Remember, we said they started their resistance in 1895, and that resistance lasted up to 1905 when they were finally defeated by the British. So we mentioned the reasons why they put up such a prolonged resistance. Are you able to remember the reasons why they resisted for quite a long time? The reasons included the terrain that they were living in. The mountainous terrain was well known to the Nandi warriors, but the British, who had come with their weapons that needed to be moved around, could not adapt to that terrain. So the terrain encouraged them to use guerrilla warfare. They could attack then go and hide in the mountains and the hills. So the British could not advance against them. Apart from that, they had a sense of pride. They were not easily going to give up to foreigners coming to take up their land. Apart from that, they had a very strong and able leadership that was provided by the institution of the Orkoiyot. And the Orkoiyot at that time was Koitalel Arap Samoei. Should remember that. So this man provided direction. He organized the army. He organized the community to fight against the British. Which other factors enabled or led to the Nandi putting up a very strong resistance or a prolonged resistance for quite some while? The other one was military experience. They were able, or they had been involved in other kinds of war with their neighbors. So these enabled them to continue fighting, and they had amassed a lot of experience. Their warriors were experienced to fight because that was a norm to them. They could raid their neighbors at will. They could raid the Gusi, they could raid the Luo, they could raid the Nandi, the Maasai, because they were quite a strong people, and they were well trained. Apart from that, they had a very large army, a very large supply of army, that each and every time they were men who were ready to fight on behalf of the community. Also, they had a steady supply of food, such that even when the British employed the strategy of scorched earth policy, that is the burning down of the crops of the Nandi and killing some of the animals, because of the vast nature of the livelihood or the economic strength of the Nandi, they were able to have a steady supply of food. So their warriors were well fed and they were strong. And then finally, we also discussed the impact of the climate on the British. They could not be able to sustain, or they could not be able to fight effectively, because the climate in the highlands was quite cold, and they could not be able to resist the diseases, the tropical diseases that attacked them. So those are some of the reasons why the Nandi were able to give such a prolonged resistance. So in our today's lesson, we are going forward to learn what are the factors or the reasons that led to them being defeated. The factors that led to them being defeated, that is one. And then number two, the results of their resistance against the British. So allow me to start with the first part, which is reasons, or you can refer to that as factors for their defeat. And when you talk of their defeat, let me write the Nandi, right? The Nandi defeat. Why were they defeated? The factors that contributed to them being defeated. The first one is that some African communities supported the British. An example are the Maasai that were conscripted by the British, and they helped the British to fight against the Nandi. Remember, the Maasai were traditional rivals of the Nandi. The Nandi constantly raided the Maasai community. So with that hatred, the Maasai joined up together with the British to fight against the Nandi. So that contributed to the Nandi being defeated. Actually, this happened in 1905. You should not forget that. So apart from the Maasai, we also had the Somali. That also took part in helping the British to fight against the Nandi. Even as such, other communities around the the Nandi did not come to support the Nandi to fight against the British. An example is the Luhya community. It did not come to aid or support the Nandi as they fought against the British. That is the first reason. Some African communities supported the British, while other communities, right? While the other communities did not come to support the Nandi. So you can imagine if other communities could join in arms together with the Nandi, they could have easily defeated the British. But now, because that was not the case, that brought them to, it resulted to them being defeated. Then the other reason or the other factor was the British had superior weapons. The British had superior weapons. The Africans or the Nandi were using rudimentary arms. They used arrows, they used daggers, they were using spears, as opposed to the British who are having rifles and machine guns. The Nandi were using spears. They were using arrows. So they did not, they are comparing between a spear and a gun or a machine gun. Which one is likely to outdo the other? That is why the Nandi ultimately were defeated, because the armies or the British army had superior weapons compared to those of the Africans. The Africans had not amassed the technology of creating guns. Remember, even as we are talking during this period, there were no industries of producing arms in the Kenyan territory. So that made a contribution towards the Nandi being defeated by the British. Apart from the superior weapons that they had, there were natural calamities. There were natural calamities. There were natural calamities that influenced or made them to be defeated. An example is the rinderpest. The rinderpest is the rinderpest that attacked their animals and led to most of the animals dying, thus making them to lack food. So when they were attacked by this pest, they were unable to sustain their economy. They were also attacked by smallpox. Smallpox. This is a disease that they did not have initially. So when they were attacked by this disease, it weakened most of them. And most of the warriors were affected. They could not effectively fight. So the natural calamities that came, this is not a result of the British. It was just a natural occurrence that really affected them, and it interfered with their way of fighting or with their way of going against the British. Let us take a step further and look what are the other factors. Number 4, the next factor, number 4, is the British used the scorched. The British used the scorched earth policy. This is where, or this involves the British going to, or after they have attacked the Nandi at one place, they could come down and burn down. They could burn and destroy the crops and the animals that had been left by the Nandi while they were running away. Remember, the Nandi were using the guerrilla warfare. They would come and attack the British and then run away from their homes to go and hide in the mountains, to go and hide in the forest. So these, they left their homes unattended to. So when the British came together with their collaborators, they would burn down they would burn down their crops, they would destroy their silos, they would destroy their granaries. So when the Nandi came back, they were unable to get food. So the scorched earth policy to some extent also contributed to weakening the defense or the resistance by the Nandi, and ultimately they were defeated. And then lastly, or the last factor that made them to be defeated was the death of Koitalel Arap Samoei. The death of Koitalel Arap Samoei. So this was the leader or the Orkoiyot. He was the Orkoiyot at that time. And remember, the Orkoiyot was a very essential person in the Nandi community. He was the overall leader. He was. It was the institution that brought together the members of the Nandi community. So they are Orkoiyot, who was at that time known as Koitalel Arap Samoei, was tricked by the colonel of the British and was captured and eventually killed. So that demoralized. It demoralized the warriors. It demoralized the warriors. So the warriors could not mount up an effective attack against the British as they had done under Koitalel, because Koitalel was the spiritual leader and he also led the community in its wars or in its expeditions against the enemies. So these weakened, or it made them to lack direction. The leaders who took over control after the death of Koitalel Arap Samoei could also not match up the organizational skills of Koitalel Arap Samoei. So the death of Koitalel Arap Samoei was, we could conclude that was the final nail to the coffin of the resistance of the Nandi, because they were now unable to effectively fight against the Nandi. So these are some of the reasons that contributed to them being ultimately defeated. And as we mentioned in our last lesson, they were defeated in the year 1905. So now that they have put up a fight, they have fought against the British, and they have finally been defeated. What were the consequences? What were the results of their resistance? So let us take a step further and look at the results. The results of the Nandi resistance. The results of the Nandi resistance. What were the consequences? What were the outcomes of their resistance against the British? Number one, loss of life. Most of the warriors lost their lives as they resisted the British. Remember, the British are using superior weapons, the machine guns and the rifles, the repeater rifles. So these led to most of them losing their lives. It is estimated that thousands of around 1,000 of warriors lost their lives during that period of their resistance. There was a lot of loss of life. Most of their lives were lost during the resistance. And then number two, they lost their land. Loss of land. So the fertile land, the land that was very fertile, that was producing the food they were using, was now taken over by the British. So they lost their land to the British ultimately, because now they have been defeated. They cannot continue to occupy that land. So the British came and took over the land. And while they were taken, or their land was taken up, the Nandi were pushed into reserves. The Nandi were pushed into reserves. Most of them, because now their fertile land has been taken away for the British settlers. The Nandi were now forced to move into the less productive land, and others were even left to become squatters in the land that the British were living in. So that was another consequence. The fourth one is that they lost their prestige. They lost their influence or prestige. They lost their influence. Remember, the Nandi were the expendables in that area at that time. They believed they could not be defeated, but now that the British have come and have finally defeated them, they now lost their influence in the region. They could now not be feared the same way they had been feared before. Let us look at some other reasons or some other results of the Nandi resistance. So the fifth one, most of the Nandi warriors were conscripted into British service. Now, because of their military skills and their ruthlessness, the British conscripted or forced the Nandi warriors to work as policemen, and also to join into the army. So they were now able to work under the British government, and also they lost their independence. They lost their independence. They lost their independence. And then lastly, they were displaced. They were displaced from their original areas of occupation. So as the British advanced and took over their land, the British or the Nandi people were displaced into other areas. Some of them had to move away from their homes. So those are some of the results or the consequences of the Nandi resistance against the British. And now I would give you a revision question as we end our lesson. Remember, we have been discussing the reasons why the Nandi resistance was defeated and the results of their resistance. So revision questions. I'm going to give you two questions, and the first question is, discuss the reasons why the Nandi resistance was subdued. And then number 2, explain the consequences of the Nandi resistance against the British. Number 1, discuss the reasons why the Nandi resistance was subdued. And number 2, explain the consequences of the Nandi resistance against the British. And I'm sure those are the very easy questions that we have effectively tackled in our today's lesson. Thank you for having time to study with me. Until the next time we shall meet for history and government lesson. Bye bye.
Welcome to Manifested Publishers.
Hello learners, welcome to chemistry lesson. My name is Mwaniki. We are learning chemistry and the topic is gas laws. Remember, the forum is still Manifested online classes. In our previous lesson, we derived the formula for Boyle's law, where we said that V1 P1 is equals to V2 P2. And we said that V1 is the initial volume, P1 is the initial pressure, V2 is the final volume, and P2 is the final pressure. That is the formula we will be using to do some calculations involving Boyle's law. In this lesson, we are going to discuss the units of pressure. We want to discuss some of the units you can use to measure pressure with. The standard unit of pressure is called Pascal. The standard unit of pressure is Pascal. So Pascal. That is the standard unit of pressure. 1 Pascal is equivalent to a force of 1 Newton exerted on an area of 1 meter squared. So 1 Pascal is equivalent to a force of 1 Newton exerted on an area of 1 meter squared. Therefore, we can say that 1 Pascal is equivalent to 1 Newton per meter squared. 1 Pascal is equivalent to 1 Newton per meter squared. Another unit of pressure, or pressure can also be measured using atmospheres. Using standard atmosphere or just ATM, so abbreviated as just ATM. Can also be measured using standard atmosphere. And we say that 1 atmosphere pressure is equivalent to 101,325 Newton per meter squared. 1 atmosphere pressure is equivalent to 101,325 Newton per meter squared. That is another unit of pressure. And lastly, pressure is also measured using millimeters of mercury. Written as mmHg. Remember, Hg is the chemical sample of mercury. So these are also units of pressure. And we say that 1 atmosphere pressure is equivalent to 760 millimeters of mercury pressure. 1 atmosphere is equivalent to 760 millimeters of mercury pressure. Therefore, those are our 4 units of pressure, which are pascals, being the first one. The second, we have said, are newtons per meter squared. And we have this illustration, or this illustration where we say that 1 Pascal is equivalent to a force of 1 Newton exerted on an area of 1 meter squared, meaning it's an area of 1 meter by 1 meter, so that it is 1 meter squared. The third unit is standard atmosphere, or just atmosphere, standard atmosphere. And again, we've said that 1 atmosphere pressure is equivalent to 101,325 Newton per meter squared. Those are units of pressure. And lastly, I have said that you can also use, or pressure is also measured using millimeters of mercury. And I have said again that 1 atmosphere is equivalent to 760 millimeters of mercury. So always understand those relationships, because again, sometimes you'll be required to convert either millimeters of mercury to atmospheres, or atmospheres to millimeters of mercury. I also want us to do some applications or some examples of Boyle's law. So we now get some examples or the applications of Boyle's law. And the first example I have this example. Let me write it for you. What is the first example? So if 60 centimeters cubed of oxygen is compressed from 20 atmospheres pressure to 40 atmospheres pressure, what is the new volume of the gas at constant temperature? So temperature must always be constant. Let's do the question. So the solution would be, so first of all, you need to understand, or need to know the expression or the formula for calculating Boyle's law. And you say that the formula is V1 P1 is equals to V2 P2, where we say that V1 is the initial volume, V1 is the initial volume, P1 is the initial pressure, V2 is the final volume, and P2 is the final pressure. So in our case, we have the first volume, or V1, is 60 centimeters cubed. P1 is 20 atmospheres. V2, this is now what we are looking at, or we are looking for, and P2, final pressure, is 40 atmospheres. 40 atmospheres. Therefore, we still have our formula V1 P1, which is equals to V2 P2. We want to make V2 our subject. Therefore, we have to divide this one by P2. Then we divide this by P2. When divided by P2, this P2 will cancel out on the right side. And you'll be left with V1 P1 divided by P2 is equals to V2. Therefore, you get the V2 from this. And you already have the V1, P1, and P2. Therefore, you just need to substitute. V1 is 60 centimeters cubed, multiplied by P1, which is 20 atmospheres. You divide by P2, which is 40. This one, if you calculate using your calculator, it will give you, that is now 60. You multiply by 20. Multiplied by 20, it gives you 1,200 divided by 40. And this gives you 30. And therefore, our V2 is 30 centimeters cubed. It is important to include the units because we are calculating the volume, and this volume is in 30, or is in centimeters cubed, sorry. It's in centimeters cubed. So it is important to include the units of measurement. That is the first example. I want to give you the second example so that you understand better. The second example is a certain mass of a gas occupies 500 centimeters cubed at 100,000 pascals. What will be its pressure? What will be its pressure at 1,000 centimeters cubed? Solution to this, remember our expression is still V1 P1 is equals to V2 P2. And our V1 is 500 centimeters cubed. P1 is 100,000 pascals. V2 is 1,000 P2 we don't have, and that is what we are looking for. Therefore, using the expression V1 P1 is equals to V2 P2, we don't have P2, and that is what we are looking for, and therefore need to make P2 our subject, and we'll make P2 the subject by dividing both sides with V2. Divide both sides with V2, then this V2 will cancel out, and you will be left with V1 P1 is equal, you divide by V2 is equals to P2, and P2 is now what we are calculating from our question. The next step, you just need to substitute. V1 is 500 centimeters cubed. You multiply by P1, which is 100,000 pascals, divide by V2, which is 1,000. Therefore, if you do the calculation using your calculator, that is 500 times 100,000 . That gives you 50 million. And divide this by 1,000. You will get 50,000. 50,000, because we are looking for pressure, then you must include the units of pressure. Therefore, it's 50,000 pascals. That is how simple the questions are, and therefore you should be able to do as many questions as possible, so long as you have the expression V1 P1 is equals to V2 P2. That will be a very great equation, or very important when you'll be doing the calculations involving Boyle's law. That is our lesson for today. But before I end, I want to do a small recap on whatever we have learned. We have learned the units of pressure, which are 4. It can be pascals, can be Newton per meter squared, can be standard atmospheres, and millimeters of mercury. And we have done 2 applications of Boyle's law. The application number 1 was if 60 centimeters cubed of oxygen is compressed from 20 atmospheres pressure to 40 atmospheres pressure, what will be the new volume of the gas at constant temperature? And we have our expression V1 P1, which is equals to V2 P2. Then from the question we have isolated, V1 is 60 centimeters cubed, P1 is 20 atmospheres, V2, this is what we are calculating, and P2 is 40 atmospheres. Therefore, because we are looking for, or we are calculating V2, we need to make V2 the subject of the formula. Therefore, from this expression, we have to divide both sides by P2. Therefore, on the right side, the P2 will cancel with the P2, and the V2 will be left as the subject of the formula. And that is now what we have at this point. Now from there, the next step is substitution. That once you substitute, then V1 is 60, P1 is 20, P2 is 40. Therefore, 60 times 20 is 1,200. To divide by 40, this will give you 60. And therefore, the V2 is 30 centimeters cubed. And I've told you again that units again you must include the units because they are so important. That shows that those are the units of measurement of volume. In the second example was a certain mass of a gas occupies 500 centimeters cubed at 100,000 pascals. What will be its pressure at 1,000 centimeters cubed volume? And therefore, again, expression V1 P1 is equals to V2 P2, where the V1 is 500 centimeters cubed, P1 is 100,000 pascals, V2 is 1,000 centimeters cubed, then P2 we don't have, and that is what we are calculating. Therefore, because we are calculating for P2, we need to make P2 the subject of the formula. Therefore, you divide both sides by V2. Then when you divide both sides by V2, now this V2 and this V2 will cancel out, and you'll be left with P2 as a subject of the formula. And you now do the substitution. V1 is 500 centimeters cubed. Then you multiply by P1, which is 100,000 pascals. Then you divide by 1,000, which is the V2, and you'll get 50 million divided by 1,000. Then you'll get 50,000 pascals. Again, the units are so important, you need to include them at the end of the calculation. So that is the end of our lesson. But I'll leave you with one more question as your assignment. And this is the question. The assignment is, at constant temperature, a gas with a pressure of 750 millimeters of mercury occupies a volume of 80 centimeters cubed. What will be the pressure of the gas if it is expanded to occupy a volume of 340 centimeters cubed? That is the assignment. Therefore, ensure that you've done the assignment before we meet in the next lesson. Thank you for being part of the lesson. Bye. We meet in the next lesson where we'll do some more calculations involving Boyle's law. Thank you.
Welcome to Manifested Publishers.
Hello learners, my name is Stephen Kariuki. Welcome to our today's topic of discussion. We are discussing genetics. And at this point, we are going to discuss the relationship between genes and DNA. During the last lesson, we discussed the chromosome, and we said that a chromosome is a thread-like structure located within the nucleus of a cell. And that chromosome contains genetic material that is in form of DNA. And that DNA is the one that determines the characteristics of an organism. So we want to find out what is the relationship between genes and DNA. And we can start by saying that a gene is a portion of DNA. A gene is a portion of DNA that codes for a particular protein. And then these proteins are then assembled together to obtain the entire organism. So, we are saying that a gene is a portion of a DNA that codes for a particular protein. So, we have very many genes coding for a particular protein or coding for different proteins. And then when those proteins are assembled together, they determine now how the entire organism will be. Now, previously, there was very little that was known about the DNA until 1953, when two scientists, that is Watson and Crick, they determined the structure of the DNA. And they explained that DNA is a double helix structure, or is a double-stranded structure. So we are saying that in 1953, Watson and Crick, these are two scientists, explained the double helix or double-stranded double helix structure of DNA. That is to say that DNA is made up of two strands, as shown. You can say as shown below. So the DNA is made up of one strand coiled onto another strand, and this is what we are calling the double helix structure of DNA, according to Watson and Crick. So we are saying that along this structure, that's where we have the genes, and those genes are the ones that code for particular proteins, such that when those proteins are assembled together, they determine the characteristics that we have. For example, how dark or how light our skin is as a result of a skin pigment that is known as melanin. So melanin is a protein. So it's a protein that determines the skin color. So when you go to another protein in our bodies, it determines another trait. So a combination of all those proteins are coded for by different genes. But when all those genes are collectively brought together, they bring about a person. So let's say that person is tall, there is the gene for tallness there. That person is dark, this is the gene for dark skin. So all those are combinations that come as a result of different genes coding for particular proteins in our bodies, so that we can have the entire organism. So the Watson and Crick didn't just explain the double helix or the double-stranded structure of the DNA as shown there, but went on further to explain what are the components of the DNA. Components of DNA. And these two biologists explained that the DNA is made up of three components. There are three components. One, so we are saying that DNA is made up of three components. One, or A, we have a 5-carbon sugar. We have a 5-carbon sugar, also known as a pentose sugar. Then a phosphate molecule, and a nitrogen base or nitrogen bases. So those are the three components of a DNA. There is a 5-carbon sugar, a phosphate molecule, and nitrogen bases. There are different nitrogen bases, e.g. we have cytosine, there is guanine, there is adenine, and thymine. So those are the components of the DNA. There are 3 5-carbon sugar, phosphate molecule, and nitrogen bases, of which the nitrogen bases are 4. The nitrogen bases are 4. Now, a collection of a 5-carbon sugar, a phosphate molecule, and a nitrogen base, we refer to it as a nucleotide. Five-carbon sugar, phosphate molecule, and a nitrogen base is called a nucleotide. That is a combination of each of the 3 components. One of these, and one of the nitrogen bases, they make a nucleotide. They make a nucleotide. And because the DNA has several nucleotides, a combination of every 3 at every stage, we can say that the DNA is a polynucleotide. It is made up of many nucleotides. And you can say that since DNA has many nucleotides, it is referred to as a polynucleotide. It is referred to as a polynucleotide because of the many nucleotides. So we are saying that DNA has many nucleotides, and therefore it's referred to as a polynucleotide. So we're going to have an example showing how the different structures of the DNA are arranged, incorporating the 3 components of the DNA. So we'll have that in form of a diagram. So we have the 2 strands of the DNA as shown there, but now this one is untwisted. Untwisted DNA strands. They have been untwisted. So we are saying that they are the 3 components. I'm going to show how they are arranged. So we have the components of the DNA on every strand. So at this point, between this point and this point, we have the phosphate molecule. That is from this point to that. Then we have the 5-carbon sugar. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 corners. Then inside here, we have the nitrogen base. We have the nitrogen base, and of which we are saying that the nitrogen bases are 4. We have guanine, adenine, thymine, and cytosine. So the amount of cytosine and guanine, they are equal, and therefore guanine pairs with cytosine, or cytosine pairs with guanine. Adenine and thymine, they pair up together because the amount of adenine and thymine are equal. So if we have cytosine here, C, here we shall have guanine, that is G. If we have adenine here, then on the other side we shall have thymine. If we have thymine here, we shall have adenine on the other side. So we call that base pairing. And then if you have again guanine here, we'll have cytosine there. So they are connected through some weak bonds that are hydrogen bonds. We have hydrogen bonds. That's a hydrogen bond. In between each base pair, we have hydrogen bonds. So we are saying that this is untwisted DNA showing the phosphate molecule, the 5-carbon sugar, and the nitrogen base. Every set of the 3 makes a nucleotide. Another set of the 3 makes a nucleotide. Another set makes a nucleotide. And that's why we are saying that the DNA is a polynucleotide. Has many nucleotides. It has many nucleotides. So we can say that the amount of cytosine is always equal to that of guanine. And this explains why cytosine always pairs with guanine. Cytosine always pairs with guanine. Also, the amount of thymine is always equal to that of adenine, the nitrogen base adenine. And this explains why, that is, thymine pairs with adenine. So you can be able to see here, cytosine is pairing with guanine because they are equal in amount. Adenine pairs with thymine. Thymine pairs with adenine. Guanine pairs with cytosine. So that base pairing. So you are saying that this is called base pairing. The fact that adenine pairs with thymine and cytosine pairs with guanine is called base pairing. So at that point we'll have another diagram whereby now we have the twisted, like we had before, the twisted DNA, the DNA showing base pairing. So we are saying that adenine with thymine, cytosine with guanine, A with the T, T with A, G with C, so we have the DNA showing how the bases are paired together. G with a C, A with a T, T with an A, G with a C, and so on and so forth. So that is what we are calling the base pairing. And then the diagram here illustrates the base pairing, just like that, but showing the other components of the DNA, the phosphate and also the 5-carbon sugar. We'll have an assignment at that point. So the assignment, explain the DNA as a polynucleotide. Explain why we say that DNA is a polynucleotide. 2, name the components of a nucleotide. And 3, a DNA strand has the following nitrogen bases: C, G, A, A, T, C, C. Show its complementary DNA strand. The complementary DNA strand. So we'll stop there until next time. Goodbye.
Welcome to Manifested Publishers.
Welcome, learners. My name is Stephen Kariungi, and we continue with our topic of discussion in Form 4 chemistry, and this is reaction rates and reversible reactions. And during our previous lesson, we discussed the effect of concentration on the rate of reaction, whereby we saw that the higher the concentration of the reactants, the higher the number of colliding particles, and therefore the higher the number of effective collisions, leading to a faster reaction. So today I would want us to ask ourselves, how does the rate of reaction proceed with the time? How does the rate of reaction proceed with the time? Is the reaction fastest at the beginning, or is it fastest towards the end? So we'll put how does the rate of reaction proceed with the time? And we'll have it in form of an experiment, which is to investigate the volume to investigate the volume of hydrogen gas collected with the time. And in this, I will set up an experiment as follows. So the setup for the experiment is as shown there, and we are investigating the volume of hydrogen gas that is collected with the time. And on this, we are going to measure about 2 centimeters of a clean magnesium ribbon. Then we put it in a flask, and then we add about 100 cubic centimeters of 0.5 molar HCl. And of course, the reaction will take place, and will determine the amount of gas that is collected. This is a gas syringe. the amount of gas that is collected in the gas syringe after every 30 seconds for a time duration of 5 minutes. So the procedure, we are saying that we measure 100 cubic centimeters of 0.5 molar HCl, hydrochloric acid, and transfer it into a conical flask. We transfer it into a conical flask, and then we add 2 centimeters of clean magnesium ribbon and immediately collect the gas produced as shown in the setup. We collect the hydrogen gas or the gas produced as shown in the setup. Measure the volume of gas collected after every 30 seconds for 5 minutes, and record the results in a table below. So in that experiment, we are putting a magnesium ribbon into 100 cubic centimeters of 0.5 molar. 0.5 molar is the concentration of the acid. We put the magnesium ribbon, and on this, we connect the gas syringe to measure the volume of gas that is being produced from the flask. And we are measuring the gas that is being produced every 30 seconds. So our gas syringe is calibrated. So every 30 seconds we read how much gas is collected, and then we record. Every 30 seconds we do that up to a duration of 5 minutes, and then we record the results in a table. So we'll have some sample results, which will be as shown. So we have time in seconds and the volume of hydrogen gas collected. Okay, so we have 0 time. So we have a sample of results. Of course, we have not done the experiment practically. So these are a sample of results. So in this case, at time 0, we had not collected any gas, that is at the beginning. After 30 seconds, we collected 24. At 60, we collected 38. At 90, we collected 48, 120, and then as we move on. So we can say the equation for the reaction here is that magnesium plus the HCl, they are reacting together to form magnesium chloride plus hydrogen gas. So that's why we are measuring the volume of hydrogen gas that is being produced. So let's say we can say rate of reaction 1 between 0 and 30 seconds. 0 and 30 seconds will be indicated by rate is equals to volume 2 over minus volume 1. The volume at the end minus the volume at the beginning divided by a time 2 minus time 1. So we get the rate. So the volume was 24 and the initial was 0. So the time was 30 and the initial time was 0. So this is 24 out of 30, and this is the cubic centimeters per second. So in this case, can calculate 24 divided by 30 is 0.8. So the time was, the rate was 0.8 cubic centimeters per second. That was for a rate of reaction between 0 and 30 seconds. Then we can measure the second between 30 and 60. Between 30 and 60, we are measuring every 30 seconds. And we are saying that the rate will be volume 1 minus volume 2 minus volume 1, 38 minus 24, that is volume 2 minus volume 1, over the time 60 time minus 30, so 38 minus 24, this is 14 over 30. Again, we calculate that, 13 over 30, so that is 0.433 cubic centimeters per second. We can still measure the rate between 60 and 90 seconds. So the rate will be, the volume at 90 is 48 minus 38 over 90 minus 60, so which will be 10 over 30, and this is 0.33 cubic centimeters per second. So, from this is something that we have noted, that initially we were collecting 0.8 cubic centimeters every second. But after, after 30 more seconds, the rate decreased to 0.433 per second. And then after 30 more seconds, we had 0.33 cubic centimeters per second. So here the conclusion is that the rate of reaction decreases with the time, or the speed of the reaction decreases with time. So in other words, the conclusion the conclusion is that the volume of hydrogen gas collected per second decreased with the time. And this shows that the rate of reaction is fastest at the beginning and slowest towards the end. So towards the end, the rate of reaction is decreasing, 0.8, 0.4, 0.3. So it goes on decreasing until finally the rate of reaction stops, because you can see the volume of hydrogen gas is not changing. So the reaction has stopped at 150. So we'll have an assignment on that. So the first question from the above experiment, determine the time taken for the reaction to be completed. You can get that from the table. What was the total volume of hydrogen gas produced? You can also get that from the table. And then finally, draw a graph of volume of the gas collected against time. So we'll stop.